deep in the heart of the Vietnamese jungle, where the thick canopy hides secrets from the sky, lies a prison that was never meant to be seen by the world. Surrounded by cliffs, deadly traps, and an unforgiving wilderness, it became a graveyard for hope, a place where forgotten soldiers were left to rot. Here, time stands still. The war may have ended, but for the men trapped inside, the nightmare continues. Abandoned by their own country, beaten by the weight of despair, they face not only their captors, but the haunting question, will anyone ever come for them? Before we go any further, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of courage, betrayal, and survival. In this forgotten outpost, one man rules with absolute power, Colonel Yen. To him, the Geneva Convention means nothing. He mocks the very idea of human rights, declaring that these men are not prisoners of war, but mere criminals, stripped of dignity and law. Under his watch, escape is a fantasy. The jungle itself is a weapon, filled with traps, cliffs, and rivers impossible to cross. The message is clear. No one leaves this place alive, unless broken, humiliated, and forced to confess crimes they never committed. Every glance, every order from Yen carries the weight of terror. To his captives, he is not just a commander. He is judge, jury, and executioner, feeding off their suffering as proof of his control. Colonel Yen ruled the camp with a grip of steel and a heart untouched by mercy. To the world, the Geneva Convention was a shield meant to protect prisoners of war, a fragile hope of humanity, even in the darkest hours of conflict. But inside these walls, that shield was shattered. Yen scoffed at it, calling it nothing more than paper lies written by weak men. To him, the Americans in his grasp were not soldiers bound by honor. They were criminals, traitors to be punished, pawns to be used in his twisted game. With every speech, he reminded them, "You are forgotten, abandoned, and no nation will come for you." The camp itself was his masterpiece of cruelty. Surrounded by razor-sharp cliffs, forests thick with deadly traps, and rivers impossible to cross, it was a prison designed to kill hope before it could even take root. "The only escape," he declared coldly, "is death." Every day, Yen orchestrated new displays of power. He broke the men not only with chains, but with fear, hunger, and humiliation. To him, torture was not punishment, it was theater. A performance to remind the others that resistance was futile, and that survival meant obedience. Yet even as his cruelty spread like poison through the camp, there were whispers in the shadows. Whispers that not every man could be broken. And those whispers always pointed to one name, Braddock. Life inside the camp was more than chains and bruises. It was a war of the mind. Each prisoner woke every morning with the same tormenting question: fight to keep your honor, or betray it just to survive another day. The barracks were filled with men who once carried medals, commands, and dreams. Now they were shadows, torn between loyalty to their country and the hunger gnawing at their bones. Some whispered of surrender. Some believed a false confession would bring them freedom. Others stared blankly at the ground, their spirit already broken. And then came the arguments, voices rising in desperation. One soldier spat in anger, "America has forgotten us. Why should we die for a flag that no longer waves for us?" Another, choking back tears, replied, "I'd rather die here than return home as a traitor to my children." The silence that followed was heavier than any chain. These weren't just debates. They were fractures in brotherhood, cracks that Colonel Yen exploited with precision. Divide them, break them, and the camp would stand unchallenged. But in the midst of despair, one figure stood like a wall of stone: Braddock. He refused to bend, refused to confess, refused to surrender even an inch of dignity. To some, he was hope. To others, he was a fool condemning them all. Every night, as the jungle sang its haunting chorus, the prisoners fought an invisible battle. Not against guns or whips, but against the slow erosion of the soul. Survival meant sacrifice, and for some it meant betrayal. Among the starving faces and broken spirits, Braddock was different. His body carried the same scars, his hands were bound by the same chains, but his eyes never surrendered. They burned with a defiance that even Colonel Yen could not extinguish. Every time Yen ordered him to confess, Braddock stood tall. He refused to acknowledge guilt for crimes he had not committed. He refused to sign papers that would brand him a war criminal. To Braddock, surrendering his honor would be worse than death itself. The other prisoners watched him closely. For some, he was a symbol of hope, proof that courage could outlast cruelty. For others, his defiance felt like madness, a stubborn pride that risked all of their lives. "All he has to do is confess," one soldier muttered bitterly, "and we go home." But Braddock's silence thundered louder than their protests. Yen tried everything. He offered food, medicine, even the promise of freedom. When that failed, he unleashed whips, isolation, and humiliation. Still, Braddock refused to bow. His resistance was not only against Yen, it was a declaration to his fellow men. "We may be prisoners, but we are not broken." This unshakable will made Braddock a target. Yen wanted to destroy him, not just physically, but spiritually. And deep down, the colonel knew, if Braddock's spirit remained unbroken, then the walls of his prison might one day crumble. The jungle camp had become more than a cage. It was a battlefield of wills, and Braddock was determined to prove that courage could outlast chains. Colonel Yen was not content with chains and hunger alone. For him, torment had to be public, a spectacle designed to crush not only the body of a man, but also the spirit of everyone forced to watch. Torture became his theater, and the prisoners were his unwilling audience. Men were dragged into the open yard, beaten until their screams echoed through the jungle. Some were burned with cigarettes, others starved until they begged for scraps like animals. Every act of cruelty was calculated, each punishment meant to send a message: resistance will cost you everything. And yet Yen's cruelty carried a twisted sense of strategy. He knew that breaking one man in front of the others was worth more than 100 whips in the dark. By staging these trials, he turned survival into a game of humiliation, a cruel contest where the only way out was confession. It wasn't just physical pain. Yen wielded psychological warfare with equal precision. He threatened families back home, dangled false letters of freedom, and forced prisoners to fight each other for scraps of food. With each test, he hoped to expose weakness, to prove that every man had a price. But every time Braddock stood firm, every time he refused to bow his head, Yen grew more enraged. The colonel's voice thundered across the camp. "No one escapes! No one resists me forever!" Still, Braddock endured. His silence became a roar louder than the colonel's fury. For the prisoners, these moments were both agony and hope. They saw men fall. They saw courage crushed. But they also saw Braddock, standing, bleeding, unbroken. And deep down they began to wonder, if one man could withstand the storm, perhaps they could too. Then came the day when Colonel Yen staged his most chilling display of power. In front of every prisoner, he dragged out Sergeant Lawrence Opelka. His crime? Not escape, not violence, but defiance. And for that, Yen declared, the punishment would be death. The jungle fell silent as the sentence was read. Opelka's face was pale, but his eyes still carried a flicker of dignity. He had fought bravely in battlefields far from here, but now his final battlefield was the execution yard of a forgotten prison. The men were forced to watch as the trial unfolded, a trial with no justice, only a script written by Yen. His booming voice echoed, "For crimes against the people of Vietnam, you are guilty." The verdict was decided before the first word was spoken. Opelka's fate was sealed. Some prisoners looked away, unable to bear the sight. Others clenched their fists, powerless rage burning inside them. To Yen, this was the perfect lesson. If Braddock would not confess, then blood would be spilled. If the others dared to resist, they too would follow Opelka's path. When Opelka's execution was carried out, a shiver ran through the camp. His death was more than the loss of a comrade. It was a warning carved in blood. Hope flickered dangerously, like a candle in the wind. For many, fear became unbearable. Whispers turned into pleas. "Braddock must confess, or we will all die here." Doubt spread like poison, and for the first time, Even the strongest men questioned if resistance was worth the cost. But Braddock's eyes never wavered. He looked upon Opelka's sacrifice not as defeat but as a reminder. If survival demanded dishonor, then perhaps dying with dignity was the only true victory left. In that moment, the prison was no longer just chains and walls. It became a graveyard of choices, and the shadow of Opelka's death loomed over every man who still dared to dream of freedom. Just when despair seemed to choke every corner of the camp, a stranger appeared, stumbling through the jungle claiming to be part of a secret rescue mission. His name was Clive Emerson. With a worn face and confident voice, he introduced himself as a man sent by an international freedom organization, working with a team just outside the camp. At first, his words felt like a miracle. Could it be true? Could salvation finally be at hand? The prisoners clung to his story like dying men clinging to air. He spoke of radio signals, of men waiting for his command, of a network larger than Yen's reach. "All I need is your cooperation," he said with certainty, "and soon you will all go home." But doubt lingered in Braddock's eyes. He measured Emerson carefully, weighing every word. The soldier's instinct told him something was off. Emerson carried no scars of battle, no discipline of a trained operative. His courage seemed theatrical, his details slippery, and then the cracks appeared. Emerson could not answer simple questions about home. He stumbled when asked about America's last baseball championship. At last, the truth surfaced. He was no rescuer. He was no soldier. Emerson was nothing more than a photographer chasing a story, a man who bluffed his way into a nightmare he could never control. The revelation fell like a hammer on the prisoners. Their fragile hope turned to dust. They had believed in salvation, only to discover it was smoke. To Yen, Emerson was a gift, a pawn to be exploited, proof that even hope itself could be deceived. For Braddock, however, Emerson's reckless bluff became something else. Though his lies brought no rescue, they ignited something the colonel could not predict. The realization that escape, however impossible, was still a dream worth chasing. If a single civilian could wander into the camp, perhaps soldiers could find a way out. But with hope came danger. Emerson's presence put every life at risk. And in the cruel game of Yen, every false move meant blood would be spilled. The camp lived in silence, but beneath that silence, whispers began to grow. Every prisoner knew it. If they stayed, they would die one by one like Opelka. If they ran, the jungle would devour them. Yet somewhere between fear and despair, a dangerous thought took root: escape. Braddock's eyes scanned every corner, every guard rotation, every weakness in Yen's design. He knew the colonel believed his prison was unbreakable. Cliffs, traps, rivers, all closing in like the jaws of a beast. But Braddock also knew that every beast had a weakness. The first spark came when contraband was spotted. Crates of weapons and explosives smuggled in by Francois Yen's corrupt associate. Meant for profit, they became something else in the eyes of the prisoners: a chance. If they could reach those crates, if they could harness even a fraction of the firepower hidden inside, they could turn Yen's own greed into the key of their freedom. Late at night, Braddock whispered plans to the few who still had the courage to listen. "If we get the explosives, we blow the gates. If we make it to the river, the jungle is ours." The men's faces were torn between terror and hope. They had seen escape attempts before, and everyone ended in blood, but this time felt different. This time, Braddock was leading. The risks were endless. Guards prowled the night, torture awaited discovery, and betrayal lurked among their own. One wrong word, one careless glance, and Yen would crush them before a plan could take form. Yet in the stillness of the camp, under the moonlight filtered through the jungle canopy, hearts began to beat faster. For the first time in years, the prisoners dared to dream of something beyond their chains. Whispers of escape spread like fire. Dangerous. Fragile. Unstoppable. Hope is fragile in a place built on fear, and Colonel Yen knew how to shatter it with precision. Just as whispers of escape began to spread, he played his next cruel card, turning trust itself into a weapon. It started with a feast, an unexpected offering of food and drink. To starving men, it seemed like a miracle. Bread, wine, and the illusion of kindness. But in Yen's world, nothing was given without a purpose. Hidden in the cups was poison, slow, silent, enough to weaken and torment but not to kill outright. Franklin was the first to falter. His body shook violently, sweat pouring from his skin as the poison consumed him. The others watched in horror as Yen smiled coldly, mocking their desperation. A little American ritual, he sneered, a funeral before death. The message was brutal and clear. Even their basic needs could not be trusted. Every crumb, every drop of water, every small gesture of mercy might be a trap. For the prisoners, paranoia took root. They began to question one another. Who had accepted Yen's offer? Who might betray the rest, just for a chance at survival? The poison was not just in their veins, it was in their minds. Braddock clenched his fists as he watched Franklin stumble. He knew Yen's true aim wasn't death, but division. If he could fracture the last threads of unity, no escape plan would survive. As Franklin collapsed, Braddock whispered fiercely to the others, "Do not break. Do not trust his gifts. Our only chance is each other." But the camp was already drowning in suspicion, and in the jungle prison, trust had become the deadliest poison of all. Colonel Yen's cruelty knew no limits. When poison and fear weren't enough to break the men, he devised a new spectacle, forcing them to turn on each other. If loyalty held them together, then loyalty would be twisted into a weapon. One morning, the prisoners were dragged into the yard. The sun burned hot above as Yen announced his newest form of entertainment, a fight to the death. And he chose his main actors, Braddock and one of his own comrades. The camp froze in silence. For years, these men had suffered side by side, sharing scraps of food, whispering hope in the dark. Now, under Yen's orders, they were to spill each other's blood for the amusement of their captor. The chosen soldier shook his head in terror. "I can't," he pleaded. "I swore I'd never harm another prisoner." But Yen's voice cut through him like steel. "Then you will die before them all." Braddock stood tall, fists clenched, refusing to move. He had fought enemies before, but never his brothers. Yet the crowd of guards surrounded them, weapons raised, leaving no choice. If Braddock did not fight, the man beside him would be executed instantly. The first blow was hesitant, a strike made not from hate, but from desperation. Then came another, harder, as Yen barked orders. "Fight, Braddock! Show them the price of defiance!" The yard erupted in chaos. Prisoners screamed for Braddock to give in, to take a fall, to spare them further punishment. Others begged him to stand, to show Yen that not even forced violence could break their spirit. Every punch, every drop of blood spilled in that circle became a war not just between two men, but between hope and despair. And in the midst of it all, Braddock's heart burned. He refused to let Yen win, refused to let the fight turn him into a weapon of the enemy. His defiance was not just in standing, it was in surviving, in enduring, in showing that even when forced to fight his own, his soul remained unbroken. By the time the fight ended, Braddock was bloodied but standing, his opponent spared from execution. The prisoners had seen it all, Yen's cruelty, Braddock's resistance, and the terrible truth that their greatest battle was not only against their captors, but against the attempt to destroy who they were as men. Night fell heavy over the jungle, but inside the barracks, whispers refused to die. The prisoners nursed their wounds, their stomachs empty, their spirits torn apart by Yen's cruelty. Yet in the shadows, a new fire flickered, fragile, but alive. Braddock sat in silence, bruises covering his body from the forced fight. He should have been broken. Instead, his defiance grew stronger. To the men around him, he became more than a soldier. He was a symbol. If one man could withstand torture, poison, and humiliation, then maybe, just maybe, they all could. Carefully, he began to speak in low tones, planning what many had feared to even dream: escape. He described the weapons hidden in Francois' smuggled crates. He spoke of explosives that could shatter the gates, of ropes hidden beneath the rocks that could guide them down the cliffs. Each detail was dangerous, but each word carried hope. Some men shook their heads, too afraid to believe. They had seen escape attempts before, ending in gunfire and death. But others leaned closer, desperate to cling to the possibility of freedom. For them, death in pursuit of escape was better than slow death in chains. That night, the barracks were divided. Fear on one side, courage on the other. Yet for the first time in years, the balance began to shift. Whispers spread from bed to bed, like sparks in dry grass. Braddock's plan was more than strategy. It was a promise. They would not die forgotten. Outside, Yen's guards patrolled as always, unaware of the storm forming within. The jungle echoed with insects and the rustle of leaves, hiding secrets of its own. And in the darkness, the prisoners dared to dream of a dawn where the gates would fall and chains would break. Hope had returned. Small, dangerous, fragile, but unstoppable. The jungle, which had long been their prison, was now their only path to freedom. But every tree, every shadow, every sound was a reminder. This was Colonel Yen's territory, a living maze of death designed to keep men trapped forever. Braddock knew it better than anyone. The cliffs were steep, the rivers fast and merciless, and the forests littered with hidden traps, bamboo spikes, tripwires, pits disguised beneath leaves. Many had already tried to run. None had returned. The jungle itself seemed to serve Yen, swallowing escapees whole. Yet the prisoners had no choice. If they stayed, they would die in chains. If they ran, they might die free. And so, guided by Braddock's vision, they began to prepare. Quietly, they mapped the guards' routines. They studied the terrain when forced into labor. They whispered about the ropes hidden beneath rocks, about the crates of explosives that could shatter the camp's illusion of invincibility. Every plan was a gamble. One wrong step, and the jungle would claim them. One traitor's whisper and Yen would strike before they even moved. But desperation has a way of sharpening courage. For the first time, men who once surrendered to despair now sharpened sticks, scavenged scraps of metal, and prepared their bodies for the fight ahead. Braddock's voice was steady as he reminded them, "The jungle is not just Yen's weapon. It can be ours. His traps are meant to kill, but we know where they lie. If we move as one, we can turn his own cage against him." The night before their move, the camp was unnervingly quiet. The guards smoked and laughed, unaware of the storm forming in the silence. Inside the barracks, hearts pounded. Some prayed, some clenched their fists, others stared into the dark, already saying their silent goodbyes. The jungle was waiting, deadly, ruthless, but also filled with the promise of freedom, for those willing to risk everything. The jungle may have been merciless, but the true storm was waiting inside the camp. Colonel Yen had anticipated the whispers of escape, and for him it was the perfect opportunity to stage his final act of dominance. He wanted not just obedience, he wanted Braddock's complete destruction. Dragged once more into the courtyard, the prisoners were forced to watch as Yen confronted his greatest adversary. His voice was calm, almost gleeful, as he announced, "This ends today. No more tricks, no more hope. Braddock will break before your eyes." But Braddock stood unflinching, bloodied yet unbowed. For years, Yen had tried to crush him with chains, poison, humiliation, and fear. Yet the American colonel remained unbroken, his silence louder than Yen's threats. Yen's fury boiled over. He cast aside his guards, his games, his weapons of intimidation. "No politics, no armies, no witnesses, just you and me," he spat, stepping forward. "We will see who the better man truly is." The fight erupted like a storm. Fists clashed, bodies slammed into the dirt, the sounds of struggle echoing against the wooden barracks. For the prisoners, it was more than a duel. It was the embodiment of their struggle, a battle between oppression and defiance, between chains and freedom. Every blow Braddock landed was a cry for those who had fallen, Opelka, Franklin, and countless others. Every strike Yen delivered carried the weight of cruelty, arrogance, and years of unchecked power. Blood poured, bones cracked, and the men watching held their breath, knowing that the outcome would decide not just Braddock's fate, but theirs as well. As the fight dragged on, Yen's strength faltered against Braddock's resolve. The colonel's cruelty had made him feared, but Braddock's defiance had made him unstoppable. With one final surge, Braddock struck the blow that sent Yen crashing to the ground. The camp was silent. Guards lowered their weapons. Prisoners stared in disbelief. The unbreakable had been broken. Yen's reign of terror had ended, not with surrender but with justice delivered by the very man he sought to destroy. And for the first time, the gates of freedom no longer felt like a dream. They felt inevitable. The dust of the showdown still hung in the air when Braddock looked around the courtyard. Colonel Yen lay broken, the symbol of fear shattered before every eye. Yet the prisoners knew their fight was not over. Outside the wooden gates, the jungle and its traps still waited. Beyond the jungle, hundreds of miles of hostile territory. Freedom was close, but so was death. Braddock gathered the men, his voice low but firm. "This is our moment. No more waiting, no more chains. We walk out together or we die here together." His words pierced through the silence, igniting sparks of courage in hearts long buried under despair. The plan unfolded quickly. Explosives hidden for weeks were placed at the gates. Guards still loyal to Yen hesitated, uncertain now that their leader had fallen. The jungle echoed with tension as the final decision weighed heavy on every man. Risk everything for a chance at freedom, or remain in the false safety of captivity. Some trembled, paralyzed by fear. Others clenched their fists, whispering prayers for strength. And then the explosion ripped through the night, a thunderclap that tore the gates apart. Smoke, fire, and chaos filled the camp. Shouts rang out, bullets flew, but the prisoners surged forward as one. Years of rage, pain, and humiliation fueled their charge. Men who had once been shadows now fought like lions, determined that if this was their last stand, it would be written in fire. The jungle swallowed them, gunfire at their backs, blood on their hands, but hope burning brighter than ever before. Each step into the darkness was a gamble, but it was their gamble, their choice. For the first time in years, they were no longer captives. They were soldiers again, brothers, free men chasing the horizon. It was not guaranteed that all would survive. Many would fall before dawn, but in that single night, they had already claimed the greatest victory, the right to choose. Death, if it came, would come as free men. Dawn broke over the jungle, painting the horizon with a pale light that cut through the smoke of battle. The camp, once a fortress of despair, now lay in ruins. The prisoners who survived moved silently through the trees, battered, bloodied, but alive, carrying with them the memory of those who had fallen. For Braddock, the victory was not in the number of men who escaped, but in the spirit that refused to die. Against torture, against poison, against betrayal and fear, he had proved that honor could outlast even the cruelest of prisons. Colonel Yen's reign of terror had ended, but his shadow would forever mark those who endured it. Opelka, Franklin, and countless others would never see home again, but their sacrifice became part of a legacy larger than the camp itself, a legacy carved into history through blood, courage, and unbreakable will. As the survivors pressed on toward uncertain freedom, they carried no medals, no banners, no songs of triumph. What they carried instead was the truth, the undeniable proof that even in the darkest corners of war, men could rise, defy, and remain unbroken. Years later, their story would echo far beyond the jungle. It would serve as a reminder of the cost of war, of the cruelty men inflict upon one another, but also of the courage that refuses to be silenced. And to every soul who still wondered whether they were forgotten, Braddock's defiance thundered through time. We were never broken, we were never lost, we were soldiers until the end.